What's going on, guys? Brad Messersmith here from the Fantasy Golf Degenerates, bringing you another expert model breakdown. Today I'm going to be breaking down my expert model on the fantasyfanatics.com for the CareerBuilder challenge. Check out the new webcam. You can see my beautiful face. Go ahead, drink it in. It's what a golfer should really look like. I'm kidding. Actually, check it out. We can make our face... That's what you came to see. I'm certain of it. Kidding. All right, let's put my face back to the normal size. Today we're going to be breaking down the CareerBuilder challenge. We've got a lot to go over, so I want to get into it. First and foremost, don't forget to check out the tournament details up in the top left of your screen. We are on the cheat sheet page, the home page as usual. If you want to get access to the cheat sheet, all of the various tools you're going to see today, make sure to become a premium member on thefantasyfanatics.com. They have everything you're going to need to be able to make lineups and win playing DFS. And I'm going to go over some of what I did for the coming week. But before we get to that, the tournament details, top left, couple of interesting tidbits that we have to cover. The course, there are 3 of them. Actually, the cut is going to happen after Saturday's round as opposed to the normal Friday evening cut. And all the golfers are going to play each of the courses at least once, and then they'll play, I believe it's PGA West again on Sunday. And so we'll get back into that in just a second, but historically, this was not always called the CareerBuilder. In the past, it was the Humana Challenge, and before that, Bob Hope Classic. They added one of the 3 courses in just last year, so use course history with a grain of salt. We'll talk about that a little bit moving forward as well. But it's really important to know that there are going to be 3 guaranteed rounds for every one of the golfers that you select. We'll talk about how to adjust in just a second, but definitely an important note to take into account when building lineups. So now that that's out of the way, let's go ahead and get into some of the meat and the potatoes. So first and foremost, let's go ahead and check out the key stats that I selected and why. Before we get into it, make sure to check out the Course Trends tool. If you have not used the Course Trends tool, it's amazing. It's basically designed to give you a better idea of what stats to be looking at in your own models. You can create your own statistical model, or you can download my expert model along with some of the other experts on the fantasyfanatics.com. But you can also go in and make your own, and if you're not sure what stats to use, start at the Trends tool. It is really, really good for telling you what is important on which courses and which events historically. So, first stat, ranked the highest with a 5 weighting is birdie or better percentage, and hopefully it's obvious at this point. If it's not that big a deal, but all the golfers are going to have 3 guaranteed rounds. Birdie or better percentage is a direct correlation to scoring. The more birdies you're going to make, the more scoring you're going to get. For normal events, we've got 2 rounds worth of scoring that only the players who made a cut will get. However, this week we've got guys who are going to be guaranteed 3 rounds. So the ones that are going to be making birdies are the ones that are going to be scoring. So birdie or better percentage, extremely critical this week. Good drive percentage and tee to green both have a 3 weighting. Strokes gained tee to green, we've talked about last week, will be a regular staple in my models. If you become a regular watcher of this video, you will know strokes gained tee to green is going to be in there almost every week, and probably a 3 or 4 weighting on most weeks. Sort of depends on the course and what we're looking at. In this case, it's got a 3 weighting. Good drive percentage, we're looking at kind of an accuracy course. I guess obviously with the 3 courses, it's kind of hard to pinpoint exactly what stats need to be used, but from what we can tell in the Trends tool and from what I can tell from my own research and analysis, the courses are going to be somewhat accuracy courses. You're going to have to hit a lot of greens. You're going to have to make a lot of birdies. There's going to be a lot of scoring out there. So good drive percentage. I also have from 100 to 125 approach distance. It is showing up as relevant in my own regression analysis. I do my own projections as well as this model, and it is showing up as relevant. So we gave that a 2 weighting. Draftkings points gained in weak field events also gets a 2 rating. This is a statistic that you can only find on the Fantasy Fanatics, and it is actually really incredible to see. The correlation is pretty strong, and we're talking about a weak field event here, no question. We'll see that when we get into a couple of the guys I talk about, but definitely a weaker field event here this week. A lot of the stronger golfers are actually playing on the Euro Tour. The Fantasy Fanatics does offer Euro Tour cheat sheets and lineup generators and expert models. So if you're interested in rostering guys like Dustin Johnson, etc. this week, go over to the Fantasy Fanatics and check that out as well. And the last couple, green and regulation, shows up pretty strongly for me in my own research, as well as the trends tool, and then scoring average. So scoring average, we do not want to weight too heavily. This is a GPP model, so we really are not interested in knowing golfers or projecting golfers highly who have long-term scoring ability. Any given week, any given golfer can finish in the top 10. We've seen it many, many times. So we don't necessarily just want the cream of the crop to make it into our lineups. We want the guys who are going to be low-owned, overlooked, who still have the ability to get into the top 10. So we want a little bit of scoring average, but not too much, because that could rule out some guys that are perfectly rosterable on GPP lineups. So we've got recent form here. We've got course history as well. Notice I'm only using 2 years of course history. Like I said, I'm not really going to trust course history too much. We'll talk about that in the weightings, but 2016 is probably the most relevant, given that it's just one data point. I did want to add an extra year just so that we have a little bit of variation in what we're seeing. Otherwise, the guys who have the best course history are obviously going to be the ones who did well just last year. So I did add an additional year, even though the correlation probably is not perfect. But I thought it was important to at least have more than one data point there. So getting into the ranks and the weightings, you can see this week we've got 85% on the stats, 10% on recent form, and 5% on course history. I talked about the course history and why I'm not really a big fan of using course history too heavily this week just now. So that explains the 5% weighting there, which is a bit lower than I typically use. Recent form 10%. Again, this is a GPP model. I'm not really interested in ruling guys out because they have not performed well recently. We see it all the time. Guys come off miscuts, multiple miscuts, a week worth or a month worth of miscuts in every event, and turn around and finish top 5, top 10. So we don't want to rule guys out just because of recent form, but it's also an interesting metric and something that we probably should take into some account. And then stats. Really, we're looking for guys who are going to fit the course and make sense at this event, which is a little more difficult knowing that there's 3 courses, but definitely not out of the question. So all of that being said, if you guys have any questions about the stats, the weighting, anything you're not sure about up to this point, make sure to give me a shout on Twitter. Happy to answer questions. I'm not perfect when it comes to stats or statistics, so I'd love to get your guys' take and input on what stats you guys are using and what you think is right and wrong when it comes to creating your own model. So let's get into the model and what the results look like. We've got as the number 1 and number 2, both interesting points here. Lucas Glover, who ranks out as the number 1 golfer in the model, really fits all of the stats that I mentioned really well. You can see if I scroll over here, first in green and regulation, 4th in good drive percentage, both of which I'm looking at pretty heavily. Birdie or better percentage is probably not the best, but good enough at least for me to definitely want to consider rostering him. So Lucas Glover, with his recent form, actually, he is also one of the better golfers in the field in terms of recent form. Has been 2 months since he played, which concerns me just a little bit, but there are a lot of golfers in the field that have that same criteria, so we're not going to look too heavily into that. Second guy on the list, Jon Rahm, at 9,700, is going to be probably one of the most popular golfers on the slate. Right now, you can see his ownership projection, without having made any adjustments, is 25%. Last time we saw Jon Rahm, he was up in the 30% plus neighborhood, and I think there may have been a week where he was almost 40% owned. So definitely expect Jon Rahm to be popular again this week. That 25% actually may be a little bit low, might get a bump upwards based on what I hear throughout the week. But that being said, Jon Rahm, in terms of statistics, is the golden god. He basically all of last year, or most of last year, did not qualify on the list of top performers in the stats on the PGAtour.com stats website. And if he had qualified, he would have been basically ranked number one across the board in all of the strokes gained categories. If he wasn't ranked number one, he was ranked near the top, almost top five in every category. So in terms of statistics, we're talking about kind of an incredible anomaly, and the guy's performed. He really has not come out and had a very bad showing in almost all of his PGA Tour events thus far, at least in recent history. He did have some PGA Tour events more than a couple years ago, but it's been a little while since he's had too terrible a performance. So definitely like Jon Rahm, despite the high ownership. At 9,700, I think he's probably underpriced even, given what he's done so far on tour. But yeah, definitely like Jon Rahm quite a bit. Dropping down a little bit more, we've got Webb Simpson and Jason Dufner, both of which stand out to me a little bit. I think Webb Simpson is probably going to be fairly popular as well this week. He was one of the more popular golfers last week and had a pretty decent showing. Let's take a look. 13th place last week. And after high ownership and decent performance, I think Webb Simpson probably follows up with another week of high ownership. Kind of interesting note, his course history is actually not too bad. A 17th and a 7th place finish. And statistically really ranks out pretty well in most of the categories across the board. Not really too much there that scares me. So going to be rostering quite a bit of Webb Simpson. At 8,200, his price has gone up a little bit, but definitely not enough to really scare me off of him. I will be having quite a bit of Webb Simpson in my GPP lineups. Jason Dufner is kind of in the same boat. Had a pretty good... I'm sorry, did he have a good performance last week? Let's take a look. No, he did not. He missed the cut. That is correct. But he did win here last year, so he might get a little bit of an ownership bump as a result. You can see in terms of statistics, he looks really good. Recent form, not so good. And course history, not too bad, which, again, I'm not really going to put too much weight into that. But, in terms of stats, he does look pretty good. He's pretty well known as kind of a proximity accuracy type guy. Really just kind of grinds it out on the course. Not the greatest putter in the world, but not something I'm concerned about at these courses this week. Dropping down a little bit more, the guy I like the most in my model actually comes in as the 7th ranked golfer, Roberto Castro. He ranks out really well in my own projections, and I think that he'll be fairly low owned at 7K. Statistically looks really good. I'm going to overlook the recent form and course history, though. We talked about it a little bit. He hasn't played in 2 months, but, course history I'm not really worried too much about, and recent form is not something that's going to keep me off of him. I think this is a really, really good GPP play. Most people are not going to be too interested in rostering Roberto Castro, other than the fact that, he does fit the course statistically pretty well, but outside of that, there's really not a whole lot here. Most people are looking at recent form and or course history, and not really a whole lot to write home about for Roberto Castro there, but really fits the course well, projects well for me. He's going to be in a lot of my lineups and should be pretty low owned. Definitely under 10%. Could be even lower than that 6.66% projection I've got there for him. May bump that down a little bit, but definitely going to be a golfer who makes quite a few of my lineups. I don't know that there's a whole lot else I want to cover up here, so let's go ahead and drop down to the bottom of the model. We always like to go down and take a look at the guys that don't fit the course well. The first guy I do want to mention has been somewhat popular over the last couple of weeks. Cameron Smith is coming in with really hot recent form, if I'm not mistaken, and yes, that is correct. He's been playing pretty well, but when you take a look at his stats, there's not a whole lot there to get excited about. Strokes gained tee to green, 173rd in the field, or ranked in the field. 173rd ranked, and basically not ranked inside of the top 125 in any of the stats we're looking for. So I know Cameron Smith has become fairly popular because of his recent form, but until I see some of those stats start to take an uptick, I am not going to be rostering too much of Cameron Smith. Going up a little bit in the model, you will see Charlie Hoffman at 8,500 is not somebody I'm going to be looking to roster. At some point, he will definitely be making some of my GPP rosters. Does not have terrible course history here, actually, but looks like he has a second place finish in 2015, but not a guy with his course fit that I'm going to look to chase. And at 8,500, I really don't like his price either. Going up a little bit more, there's a lot of guys under 7K that are down here, so we'll kind of move past a lot of those guys. But interesting note, Zach Johnson is 10,200 and comes in at the 80th ranked golfer in the field. For somebody who's that high priced, I'm not really interested in taking this kind of risk, especially with the lack of fit here. Does have good recent form, which will keep his ownership percentage high, and that scares me. In GPPs, that's not something we want to look to target. Has missed 2 cuts in 2 tries in the last 2 years. Excuse me. But definitely not going to be rostering too much of Zach Johnson. That being said, with Zach Johnson, if you're making a lot of lineups, I would suggest at least having some of Zach Johnson. Definitely the caliber golfer that can win this event. And as such, I would not suggest full fading Zach Johnson. Going up a little bit further, there's a guy I want to talk about that I think is going to be overlooked enough that I am going to sort of ignore the model. Francesco Molinari really does not project out too well for me in terms of the stats, which is getting the highest weight this week. However, he does have fantastic recent form, which is 8 or 9 weeks removed, I believe. Yeah, so 9 weeks ago he had a 4th place. A couple weeks before that, a 4th place and a 6th place. So really hot coming in, despite the fact that it's obviously a couple months ago. But statistically, I don't hate Francesco Molinari. He's not the best golfer in the field by a long stretch. But the main thing that I like about Francesco Molinari is he can clearly finish top 10. He has the upside, and his ownership should be fairly low. We'll see. I think his $10,300 price, which is too high, is hopefully going to keep quite a few people off of him. Right now I have him projected at around 7%. We'll adjust that as the week goes on, so check back into your cheat sheets and see how that changes as I see and hear things throughout the industry. But yeah, Francesco Molinari is probably one of my favorite GPP plays up top. Going to be low owned, has the ability to play into the top 5, and that's a recipe for success in GPPs for sure. So that's basically going to do it. If you guys want to check out any of the other guys in my model, make sure to check out the expert models. You can download mine and look at all of my rankings on the fantasyfanatics.com. And if you guys have any questions about different players, guys I like, guys I don't like, feel free to reach out to me on Twitter at Brad Messersmith, and I'll be happy to answer as many of the questions as I possibly can. And other than that, we'll catch you guys next time.